to use some functions and all, right? You need to interact with the web page. How do you do that? Okay, first of all, it depends on which browser you are, whether you are using Firefox driver, whether you are using Chrome driver, or whether you are using iDriver. But the question arises, is the process of clicking on the link different on Firefox? Is the process different on Chrome? Is the process different on IE? Because all these three classes are different, and all these three classes would be having their own functions. No, it's not like that. Okay, so we'll study that now. We'll go back to Java now. Okay, we will go back to Java now. So let's go back to the class car from where we had started. Okay, now this thing practically is known as a non-static stuff, non-static variable. Practically this function is known as a non-static function. Okay, now suppose if I give a property called as int wheels. Now we know that every car has got 4 sets of wheels. This is a property which is kind of common for all the car objects. Right? Here you will get your answer in some time. Okay. Now this is the wheels property which is common for all the cars. Right. Now if you go to your test car, and if I write c1 dot wheels is 4, c2 dot wheels is again 4, and c3 dot wheels is again 4, there is no point doing this. So what we do is that we make this static. So static stuff, okay, what happens is that if there are multiple objects in the memory, okay, static stuff is common between all the objects. This is static. All the objects will refer the static at this common location. Okay, static is not a property of the object. This is not a property of object. Okay, if you go to your test car, you can write over here car dot wheels equals to 4. This will imply that all the objects will have 4. You can access static things by the name of the car class. That is the class name dot static stuff name. Okay. Now if you write over here Firefox driver, let's go back to Selenium. If I write Firefox driver dot, these are the static contents in it. I'll talk about them, don't worry. Fine. Or if you write Internet Explorer driver dot, these are the static components of IE class. Fine. So every class will have static and non-static. Static will not be a part of the object. Okay, you don't have to create the object of the class to call that static part. Fine. For using non-static, obviously you will have to create the object. If you have to use make or start function, you will have to create the object. You cannot write in Java that car dot make is some make. You cannot do like this. For non-static, you have to make the object. Okay. Fine. Now coming back to the first question, one of the few questions which was asked me in the beginning. Fine. Why is the main function static, public static? Why? What do you mean by static? Again, main function is static so that when Java calls it, main function is called by default, right? You don't have to really call it. It's called automatically by Java. Fine. I'm not sure what's the problem with terms. I'm not sure. Okay. Now main class is called by Java. Okay. So sorry, main function is called by Java. When Java calls this main function, it never creates the object of this class to call it. That's why main is static. if I don't make this static and if I try to run test tab, I will actually, if I run this test tab, you will not get an option called run as, you will not be able to run it. The previous file is actually getting executed, right? So you have to make it static, so that when Java calls it, it calls it like this test tab.main. Fine. Okay. Yeah, methods can be called without creating instance provided the methods are static. For example, there is a class in Selenium. It is known as by. By is a class in Selenium. It tells you the criteria on which you can identify the elements on your page, like a button or a link. Okay, there is a class called by. So these are the various criteria on which, this is the by class, and you have all these functions in it. All these functions are static. By class name, by CSS selector, ID, link text. So if actually you write by dot over here, you will get the criteria, XPATHS, tag name, what are these criteria, we'll talk about it, but these are the criteria on which Selenium can identify. Because this class is static, I don't need to create the object of this class to use these criteria. Okay, but first of all, let us understand the very basic fact that will Firefox driver, IE driver and Chrome driver be having different functions for operations or different operations? What if a new driver comes up tomorrow? Right? Like Safari driver has come up, will it have new set of operations? Okay, to understand that, you have to understand the concept of interfaces in Java. Under object oriented programming, you need to understand the concept of interfaces. To understand the concept of interfaces, let's create a new class, and I'll name this class as, or hold on, not a class, sorry, a new interface. Not a class but an interface. What an interface is, you will come to know in some time, right? Suppose I create an interface called company. Okay, now interface is just like a structure. For example, when you go to your, this is a very common example which I give to everybody, that when you go to a restaurant to have food, right, the first thing which you look at is the menu card. On the menu card you have got various dishes listed and you select which one you want to eat. You really don't know how that thing is prepared, right? So the interface is just like that. You will have functions like this in it: public void hire. This is one of the functions of a company. It hires people, right? Then public void give salary. This is again one of the functions. Then public void pay raise. Slow net speed. You need minimum 500 kbps. Okay. So these are some of the basic functions of an interface. Like it's like an outline. It's like an outline what your application is supposed to do. Just looking at the interface, you can say what the application does. Fine. It's not got any method body or something. Right? So what is the use of this interface then? When it's got no method body, when it's not got anything inside it, right? Then what is the use of this interface? Why we use it, and what do we get by using such an interface? Right? Well, basically, suppose I have got another class, say a class like Infosys, and everybody knows Infosys is a company. Fine. And what Infosys will do, it will write I implement company. When it writes Infosys, when it writes it implements the company, it should actually implement all the functions in the company. It should give the method body to the company. It's mandatory. It's mandatory for a class to implement all the functions of an interface. If you move the mouse over this class, you'll get the option add unimplemented methods. Fine. You simply go and add, click on this, and you will get 3 functions out here: hire, give salary, and pay rise and all. Fine. And these functions will actually be coming from the company interface. Every function will have an @override tag. It's not mandatory to keep this. You can remove this as well. But this tells a layman that this function, suppose I'm looking at the code for the first time. So I will automatically come to know that these 3 functions are coming from the company interface. Okay. Now suppose in the hire function you write system.out.println infi hiring, then infi giving salary, infi hiring salary. Fine. So right now suppose there is one more class. Suppose there is another class called Adobe. Okay, and the Adobe class also implements the interface company. Right. When a class is implementing the interface, it will again have to add the unimplemented functions. Right. Then again these signs will come up. Right. And in this function, I will write Adobe hiring. Depending on the class, yes, the functions can have different contents. Adobe giving salary. And for pay raise, you can write hiking. These auto-generated @override signs, you don't have to worry about them. They just tell you that these functions are coming from the company interface. If you delete them, then also that's fine. Okay, it's just to tell you. This is actually known as function overwriting, the whole process. That is, the function comes from the company interface. That is the parent. Company is the parent to Adobe. Fine. So yeah, it starts with @. Okay, so now we have got 2 companies, Infi and Adobe, which are implementing the company interface. Right. Now if I go and create a new class called test company, okay, and we make the main function. Yeah, when it's common to all, we decide to make the interface. But practically when you work with Selenium, you don't have to make the interface. Everything is inbuilt. Like the Firefox driver is inbuilt, Chrome driver is inbuilt, IDE driver is inbuilt, Safari driver is inbuilt. Similarly, all the interfaces are inbuilt. Okay, I'll talk about Selenium. I'll just come back to Selenium in some time. Okay, so now what if I create the object of the company class? I'll come over to that point. I'll come over to the point that what is the importance of interface in Selenium. Okay, fine. Okay, question being asked is, can I select in Infosys that I just want to implement hire and give salary? No. If you are implementing, you have to implement all. If I just cut one of the methods from here, you will get an error. If you are implementing an interface, it's mandatory for you to implement all the functions of the interface. Whether you keep the functions blank, it doesn't matter, but you have to implement. Okay, fine. So now, sorry. Out here, I'm writing suppose if I create the object of company interface, I write company C equals to new company. When I write this, I'll get an error. Why? Because you cannot create object of interfaces. You cannot create object of interfaces because interfaces are abstract. There is nothing inside an interface. Okay, there is nothing inside an interface. You cannot create the objects of interfaces, right? But I can create the object of Infosys. Infosys I equals to new Infosys. Fine, you can write I dot give salary, I dot hire, I dot pay raise. Fine. Similarly, you can create the object of Adobe. Right? You can write Adobe A equals to new Adobe. Fine. And A dot gives salary, A dot hire, and A dot pay raise. If you run this, you get the output like this: giving salary, infy hiking salary. Alright, and similarly for Adobe. Okay, now if you look at this carefully, fine, the name of the methods are same, but the implementation will depend on the class. Maybe Adobe has a different way of hiring and Infosys has a different way of hiring, but this gives me a structure. This actually gives a structure to the complete application. Okay, so since it gives the structure to the complete application, fine, it makes it very easy to understand, right? You will be knowing that the hire function is same for all the classes. Suppose if tomorrow a third company comes up and it implements the interface, you will automatically come to know that which functions will be there in that third class. Okay, similar thing is in WebDriver. Now all of us have heard the word WebDriver. Fine. What WebDriver is? WebDriver is actually an API, it is an interface. WebDriver is actually an interface, practically. Fine. If whatever is written in italics in this documentation is an interface. For example, out here there is a class called mouse. There is an interface called mouse. This helps you to simulate mouse movements with Selenium. It's an interface. And these are the implementing classes which implement the mouse interface. Both the classes will have the same functions which are defined over here: click, context, click, double click, mouse down, mouse move, mouse up. So basically this is important, right? That's why I told you the concepts of object oriented programming are very important. Fine. Similarly, if you actually go down and you look at the WebDriver interface, fine, out here you will realize that these are all the classes implementing it: Android driver, Android WebDriver, Chrome driver, event filing driver, Firefox, HTML unit, IE driver, iPhone driver, remote web driver, Safari driver. So all of these are the drivers. Suppose if tomorrow a separate support for a separate version comes up, right? Separate version of browser or a separate browser comes up. That particular browser driver will implement the WebDriver interface and it will have all the functions which are there in the WebDriver interface. For example, close is used to close the current window. Find element function, it is used to find an element on the page. So all these functions will be there in all the browsers. Get title, get page source, get current URL, navigate to a particular URL. I think functions are self-explanatory as well, some of them. But the concept out here is important, that one interface and many classes implementing that interface. So if you have to find an element in Firefox, or if you have to find an element in IE, the function is same. For example, in IE, if I have to find out, I'll have to write driver dot find element. Okay. Similarly, in Firefox, if I have to find it out, I'll write Firefox object dot find element. So the function would remain the same. Okay. So this is the importance of interfaces. Right. Now, another important thing, that is, suppose you are hold on. Yeah. Now this is simple. Right. Now suppose I go to my Infosys, I go back to Java, right? If you're not able to understand anything at any moment of time, please feel free to ask me, right? I'll tell you this, I'll answer all your questions, right? Now let's go back to the Infosys class. Now suppose there is another function which Infosys tries to implement, that Infosys wants that one more function should be present in its operations. It is not in the company interface, but still Infosys can write, for example, a function like public void give training, right? So this particular function, it is only for Infi, right? And if I go to my test company.java and I write over here I dot, I'll get the function give training. Fine, I'll get this function. That is not there in Hadoop. So we can add more functions as well inside a class which is implementing an interface, apart from the functions which are coming from the particular interface. Okay. Now suppose I write like this. Now there is a new way. This is a new way. That is, I write company reference C equals to new Infosys. Now this is a little bit tricky. Out here I was writing simply the name of the class equals to name, the reference equals to the object, right? Out here I have taken the reference of company class, equated it to the object of Infosys. Now what can we do? It's not showing you an error. If Eclipse is not showing you an error, that means this is a legal line. This line has got no issues with it. Fine. But if it has got no issues with it, then what does this line practically, what does it do? Fine. So, well, if you write over here C dot, you will get the function give salary. Okay. You will get the function hire. You will get the function pay raise, but you will not get the function give training. This will not be there. You will get an error. So if you are writing like this, with C you can only call the functions of the interface which are implemented in the class. You cannot call functions which the class has written for itself. Okay. Now what is the practical usage of this? When do I have to use this in Selenium? When do I have to use this? Right. Now WebDriver is an interface. Okay. I can write like this. I can write, that means I can write WebDriver driver equals to new Firefox driver. I can write like this. This means that I can import the WebDriver class sorry, WebDriver interface. Now with this, I can only call the functions which are yeah, Madhusmita.
I have one question.
Yeah.
Can you go to testcompany.java class? That's fine.
Yeah, tell me.
Just come down. Like last one, you have written like company is equal to new Infosys.
Yes.
Earlier, when you told like C is the reference of Infosys object. So
C is out here. Out here, C is the reference of the company class, company interface.
It is not reference of this object Infosys?
No, it is the reference of the company interface. But Infosys is implementing that interface, so we can use it. Okay. So with this, you can only call those functions which are implemented by Infosys from company, not the functions which are there for Infosys on its own. Okay. Yeah. If anybody like Parth or Priyadarshini, I think you have raised hands. If you have any questions, you can unmute yourself and you can ask the question. Okay.
So you need to say that Infosys, the C is the reference of company C, but it is pointing towards Infosys object.
Yes, and it will have only limited access to that object. Okay. Only stuff which is there in company can be used by C. Okay. Now, similarly, I can write WebDriver driver equals to new Firefox. Why? Because the Firefox driver is implementing the WebDriver interface, and you can only call those functions in Firefox driver which are from the WebDriver interface, not which are local to the Firefox driver. But they have implemented the API in such a way that hardly any function is there in Firefox driver which is of its own. All the functions are coming from WebDriver. Okay. Now, how does this thing help us? Right. Now, suppose you have to work with dynamic browsers. That is, suppose you have a situation wherein in your Excel file you mention that you have to do the testing on this particular browser, and the code will read the Excel file and it will test on that particular browser. Right. Suppose I write over here string browser equals to Mozilla. That means I need to test on Mozilla. Suppose this string is coming from Excel file or an XML file, whatever it is, or a property file. Right? We'll study all of that later on, that how to read from XML, Excel properties file and all. But suppose right now I'm just hard coding the string here, right? So what we will do is we'll define an object. I'll write WebDriver driver equals to null. I'll create the WebDriver interface. Right, I'll create the reference, but I will not initialize it. Fine. So hold on. Just a minute. Fine. Okay. Now I'll keep a condition that if the browser which is read is dot equals is the function which does string comparison. Yeah, Kumar, you can ask a question. You are on unmute right now. You can even speak and ask. Yeah, just unmute yourself. I accidentally muted you. Yeah, Kumar, you can ask a question. Fine. So if the browser, I'm not able to hear you, Kumar. Fine. If the browser is equal to Mozilla, fine. You can type your question out here as well. What is the purpose to use interface for Selenium? Yeah. So that's what I'm telling you. What is the purpose of using interface? Right. So that you have the common functions. First of all, you have the common functions in all the drivers, which I think you have understood by now. And secondly, a scenario like this in which I have to read the browser from an Excel file and open it when you real-time test your applications, like on various websites, you have to do that. Every time you just cannot go into your code and Your manager tells you fine, do testing on Firefox. You go inside the code and write Firefox driver equals to new Firefox driver and then start. Every time you cannot do like that, right? So